The glamorous, sun-drenched shores of the French Riviera were supposed to be the backdrop for a magical, restorative romantic getaway for Steffy Forrester Finnegan and her husband, John Finn Finnegan. Instead, the picturesque Mediterranean paradise transformed into the staging ground for a catastrophic marital implosion. The sudden, terrifying appearance of Sheila Carter on the Monaco beach shattered the fragile peace the couple had desperately tried to build. For Steffy, the sight of the woman who had mercilessly gunned her and her husband down in a dark alleyway was enough to trigger a severe, paralyzing wave of post-traumatic stress disorder. But the true, unforgivable betrayal did not come from the psychotic mother-in-law lurking in the shadows. It came from the man standing right beside Steffy. When Finn hesitated and offered a slight defense of Sheila's delusional pleas for family integration, something inside Steffy permanently broke. In a moment of absolute, blinding fury and profound heartbreak, she ripped her wedding ring from her finger, hurled it directly at Finn's chest, and turned her back on her marriage. Fleeing the emotional wreckage of Monte Carlo, Steffy boarded the first available commercial flight back to Los Angeles. The stark, cramped reality of the commercial cabin stood in sharp, depressing contrast to the luxurious life she was leaving behind. As the jet engines hummed a monotonous, droning lullaby, Steffy sought the only immediate solace available to her: alcohol. Glass after glass of strong liquor served as a desperate, numbing agent against the agonizing pain radiating through her chest. This was not the first time Steffy had chosen to run away when the suffocating weight of her marital problems became too heavy to bear. Her historical pattern of fleeing to Europe to clear her head was well documented, but this time, the emotional stakes felt entirely different. She was not just running away to think, she was running away because the fundamental foundation of trust in her marriage had been completely obliterated by Finn's incomprehensible loyalty to a monster. By the time the aircraft finally touched down on the tarmac at LAX, Steffy was heavily intoxicated, her senses dulled by the alcohol, but her heart still bleeding from the fresh wounds of betrayal. The thought of returning to the empty, echoing Cliff House, a place tainted by Finn's broken promises and the lingering, invisible specter of Sheila Carter, was entirely unbearable. She needed a sanctuary, a place where she could hide from the agonizing reality of her shattered personal life. Operating on pure instinct and the hazy guidance of a liquor-soaked mind, Steffy directed her driver to the towering headquarters of Forrester Creations. The sprawling executive suites, usually a bustling hub of corporate warfare and high-fashion drama, were dark, silent, and entirely deserted in the late hours of the night. Or so she thought. While Steffy was navigating her transatlantic nightmare, another profound tragedy was quietly unfolding within the very same city. Carter Walton, the handsome, fiercely loyal chief operating officer of Forrester Creations, was experiencing a devastating, life-altering heartbreak of his own. For years, Carter had yearned for nothing more than a stable, loving family and the opportunity to experience the profound joys of fatherhood. After a string of disastrous, failed engagements to women like Zoe Buckingham, Quinn Fuller, and Paris Buckingham, Carter believed he had finally found his safe, enduring harbor in Daphne Rose Walton. Their marriage was supposed to be the beautiful, triumphant culmination of his lifelong search for domestic bliss. However, a cruel, unforgiving twist of biological fate had brutally ripped that dream away. The severe, unapologetic diagnosis delivered by Dr. Lee Finnegan had struck the Walton household like a devastating earthquake. Daphne was suffering from premature menopause and irreversible infertility, a medical reality that instantly annihilated their carefully constructed plans for a nursery and a growing family. While Carter had immediately and desperately vowed to stand by his wife, insisting that his love for her far exceeded his desire for biological children, the psychological damage to Daphne had already been done. The diagnosis triggered a severe, paralyzing wave of functional depression within Daphne. She became entirely consumed by a toxic, suffocating guilt, utterly convinced that her biological limitations were a curse that would forever anchor Carter to a life of unfulfilled longing and quiet resentment. Unable to bear the agonizing weight of her own perceived inadequacy, Daphne made a drastic, unilateral, and deeply tragic decision. In a misguided, desperate attempt to free the man she loved, she packed her bags and announced her immediate departure for Paris. Carter's frantic, tearful pleas, his unwavering declarations of unconditional love, and his desperate promises to explore alternative paths to parenthood like adoption or surrogacy all fell on deaf ears. Daphne's depression had built an impenetrable fortress around her heart, and she walked out the door, leaving Carter standing alone in the wreckage of a marriage that had barely begun. The profound sense of emasculation, grief, and absolute helplessness completely paralyzed him, driving him into the dark, silent corridors of his workplace. The dimly lit executive office at Forrester Creations became a tomb for Carter's shattered dreams. Sitting behind the heavy mahogany desk, he poured himself a generous, overflowing glass of premium whiskey, the amber liquid burning a fiery trail down his throat, offering a fleeting, temporary distraction from the agonizing ache in his chest. The heavy, oppressive silence of the room was a stark reminder of the empty house he could not bear to return to. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life fixing the legal and personal messes of the Forrester family, yet he was entirely powerless to fix the catastrophic failure of his own personal life. It was in this atmosphere of profound, suffocating grief that the heavy oak door of the executive's suite slowly creaked open. Carter looked up, his eyes adjusting to the dim moonlight filtering through the vertical blinds, to see Steffy Forrester Finnegan standing in the doorway. The usually impeccable, fiercely confident co-CEO looked entirely disheveled, her designer clothes rumpled from the long international flight, her makeup slightly smudged, and her eyes swimming in a chaotic sea of unshed tears and heavy intoxication. The sheer, unexpected shock of seeing each other in such a desolate, broken state created an immediate, unspoken bond of mutual agony between the two longtime friends. Without uttering a single word, Steffi stumbled into the office, her high heels clicking erratically against the polished hardwood floor. She bypassed the plush visitor chairs and moved directly toward the crystal decanter resting on Carter's desk. With trembling hands, she poured herself a massive measure of whiskey, downing it with a desperate, practiced efficiency that immediately signaled the depth of her internal torment. Carter watched her with a mixture of deep concern and empathetic understanding. He did not ask her why she was not in Monaco, nor did he question the absence of the sparkling wedding ring that usually adorned her left hand. The heavy, intoxicating scent of alcohol and the palpable aura of devastation radiating from her told him everything he needed to know. Slowly, the heavy silence was broken by the fragile, trembling sound of Steffi's voice. The alcohol had completely stripped away her usual formidable defenses, leaving her raw, exposed, and incredibly vulnerable. She began to vent, the words spilling from her lips in a chaotic, emotional torrent. She detailed the horrific, traumatic confrontation on the Monaco beach, the sheer, paralyzing terror of seeing Sheila Carter's face, and the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal of Finn's hesitation. She wept openly as she described the profound absurdity of a husband who would prioritize the feelings of a psychotic, attempted murderer over the psychological safety of his own traumatized wife. Every word she spoke was laced with a venomous mixture of grief, anger, and the terrifying realization that her marriage was likely over. Carter listened with the deep, unwavering empathy of a man who was intimately familiar with the agonizing sting of losing the person he loved most. When Steffi finally paused, her chest heaving with heavy sobs, Carter softly shared his own unfolding nightmare. He spoke of Daphne's devastating medical diagnosis, the cruel, unforgiving nature of her functional depression, and the agonizing pain of watching his wife pack her bags and flee to Paris. He described the profound, crushing helplessness of being pushed away by the woman he had sworn to protect, all because of an uncontrollable biological twist of fate. The irony of their shared situation was not lost on either of them. Two highly successful, powerful, and attractive individuals who possessed everything money could buy, yet had just lost the only things that truly mattered to them. As the night wore on, the dangerous, intoxicating cocktail of profound grief, shared vulnerability, and copious amounts of premium whiskey began to blur the established, rigid lines of their professional relationship and their long-standing friendship. The physical distance between them in the dimly lit office gradually, almost imperceptibly, began to close. Carter moved from behind the heavy desk to sit beside Steffy on the plush leather sofa, offering a comforting, grounding presence in the midst of her chaotic emotional storm. When a fresh wave of tears cascaded down Steffy's cheeks, Carter instinctively reached out, his strong, warm hand gently wiping the moisture from her face. It was a simple, innocent gesture of comfort, but in the highly charged, emotionally volatile atmosphere of the dark office, that touch lingered just a fraction of a second too long. The air between them suddenly grew thick, heavy with an unspoken, desperate human need to feel something, anything, other than the agonizing, suffocating pain of rejection and heartbreak. Steffy looked up into Carter's dark, sorrowful eyes, and in that fleeting, electrifying moment, the boundaries of morality, loyalty, and friendship completely evaporated into the alcohol-soaked air. The spark ignited into a raging inferno. The kiss, when it finally happened, was not a slow, romantic culmination of hidden desires. It was a frantic, desperate, and explosive collision of two wounded souls. It was a fierce, passionate eruption of repressed emotions, a frantic search for a temporary anchor in the middle of a raging, destructive emotional storm. Steffy's hands tangled desperately in Carter's shirt, pulling him closer with an intense, intoxicating urgency, while his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, anchoring her to the present moment and banishing the haunting ghosts of Finn and Daphne to the shadows of the room. The taste of whiskey and salty tears mingled in a fervent, breathless encounter that defied all logic and reason. As the kiss deepened into a fervent, desperate physical encounter, the scandalous magnitude of their actions faded into the background, completely overshadowed by the overwhelming, intoxicating haze of grief and passion. They were crossing the ultimate, unforgivable line. Steffy was not just betraying her marital vows, she was crossing a devastating boundary with the husband of her close friend. Carter, despite Daphne's unilateral decision to abandon their marriage and flee to Paris, was still a married man, and he was compromising his impeccable moral compass by engaging in a highly illicit affair with his boss and friend. The potential destruction of the Forrester legacy, the inevitable media scandal, and the irreparable damage to their intertwined personal lives were all entirely ignored in favor of the temporary, blinding relief of physical connection. However, the intoxicating, passionate oblivion of the night could not last forever. The morning after arrived with a harsh, unforgiving brutality. As the bright, piercing sunlight of the California morning filtered through the vertical blinds of the executive office, it illuminated the tangled, rumpled clothing and the undeniable, horrific reality of what had transpired. The heavy, pounding headache of a severe hangover was nothing compared to the crushing, suffocating weight of the moral hangover that instantly crashed down upon them. The temporary, desperate relief of the night before had completely vanished, replaced by a sobering, terrifying realization of the catastrophic mistake they had just made. Steffy's internal turmoil was absolute and paralyzing. As she hurriedly gathered her clothing, her mind raced with a chaotic, terrifying whirlwind of guilt and panic. She realized with a sickening dread that her impulsive, drunken mistake could not simply be erased or ignored. She had crossed a line that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her life, her career, and her relationships. The terrifying prospect of the truth eventually coming out of Finn discovering her infidelity, of the Forrester family facing a massive public scandal, and of Daphne learning of the ultimate betrayal sent a cold, paralyzing shiver down her spine. The cycle of guilt, passion, and profound regret had officially begun, trapping her in a suffocating web of her own making. Carter's conflict was equally devastating. As he watched Steffy frantically try to compose herself, the swirling vortex of guilt and lingering passion threatened to consume him entirely. He had betrayed the sacred vows he had made to Daphne, regardless of her decision to leave him. He had compromised his professional integrity and deeply jeopardized his standing within the Forrester family. Yet, amidst the crushing guilt, there was also a terrifying, undeniable spark of lingering connection to Steffy, a shared trauma that had permanently bonded them in the most scandalous, destructive way possible. They were now co-conspirators in a devastating secret that possessed the explosive power to destroy everything they held dear. The stage is now set for one of the most explosive, emotionally complex, and highly scandalous storylines in the history of Los Angeles. The forbidden, desperate encounter between Steffy Forrester Finnegan and Carter Walton is a ticking time bomb, a devastating secret hidden behind the closed doors of Forrester Creations. As they attempt to navigate the treacherous, guilt-ridden waters of their respective shattered marriages, the looming threat of discovery will cast a dark, suffocating shadow over their every interaction. Will this drunken mistake remain a secret, or will it ignite a catastrophic inferno that burns the Forrester legacy to the ground? The drama is only just beginning.